I will say, if you guys can move up a little bit, because this will be interactive and I will be throwing things. So the closer you are, the less I'll beam you in the head with something. Yeah. That's about beaming someone in the head. Is that the promise I made? You don't all have to be the chairs, but just kind of at least get up here a little bit. That's right. So as I'm getting started here, how many people have done cybersecurity training and found it boring? Few of you, right? And how many of you have done cybersecurity with other people within an organization and watched their eyes glaze over and be completely, almost always, right? So that's one of the things that we're kind of going to focus on this talk. It's not new, gamification, everybody knows what that is, but it's how to apply it into what we do, which is cybersecurity. And especially in the places that I do it in, which is critical infrastructure. So a lot of those things have a lot of rules, a lot of training. One of our specialty ones is certainly nuclear. They train the heck out of you. And so there are tons and tons and tons of training courses, CBTs, you name it, you're perpetually getting trained. And as we'll go through, what happens with a lot of people is they just kind of have a click test to see how fast they can click through the training, get whatever cert that it prints off at the end and say that they're done. And who would blame them, right? I mean, it's, it's boring, it doesn't really accomplish anything. And most of the cases, whatever we're talking about has almost nothing to do with their job. So it's kind of just another one of those check boxes you gotta get done. So as we're going through this, I encourage everybody to shout out. There's no thing if you've got an answer to something or a question. And I will be giving out and beaming people with chips. And at the end of it, I will tell you what some of that is about and why you want them. Okay? Yep. So, real quick, what we're going to go through is some boring definitions because every single training thing must start off by telling you what you already probably know and emphasizing that. Going about the evolving threat landscape because every single thing with cybersecurity always involves what the threat landscape is and how it's evolving. And finally, why we need an innovative approach to this. And then we'll actually go through the gamification, what makes it successful, and some of the things that make it unsuccessful. Yep. So, protecting essential services, right? So critical infrastructure refers to essential systems and assets that are vital for the functioning of a society and economy. So in the United States, and according to CISA, how many critical infrastructure sectors do we have? Does anybody know? Who said 16? Well, see, now you want me to beam you, don't you? Sitting all the way back there. There you go. There are 16 sectors. And can you name some of them? What are some of the sectors? Healthcare, energy, transportation. You going for gold? How many? Can you name all 16? Or at least the 13 you knew? Right, yours 13. Manufacturer, financial. There's some oddball ones like I think one of them is like facilities. That's an interesting one. Let's talk about that in a second. But yeah, aerospace is in there. So there's 16 of them. If you look at them, do you see anything that anybody calls out that might be missing out of that? Or you think they got them all covered? So it's up to some debate. No crime prevention? Well, there is emergency services right there. That should be on there. But it was a good one. I'll give you a chip for. Any other takers? Like supply chain stuff, they usually. Yeah, I mean that's a good call. There could be plenty more, honestly, but the one that came to a lot of people's mind was space, because it doesn't really fit as much as everyone says. Like at first they said, oh, it's communications, but it's not really. We do all kinds of stuff in space that isn't communications. So that's one that's been up for a lot of debate recently, is whether or not space should be one of them. There are probably others. Some of them they've crammed in underneath of that stuff. What was interesting, at one brief moment in time, I don't know if anyone noticed it, they used to have gaming up there, like gambling. And I think a lot of people said, I'm not sure that's critical infrastructure. But, you know. So, the evolving threat landscape, right? Do you have anything that you think that has increased in this area? You know, cybersecurity recently, right? Well, certainly those are the types, right? But this is like a focus from, like what the threat. Yeah, go ahead. Just don't raise, just yell. Attacks? Oh, attack surfaces? That's a good one. So, nation state attacks. Can you think of any other ones like that? As a hint. Insider threat's a good one. Here, let me. Well, AI, because it's always AI, right? Yeah, no. Yeah, that's right. We'll spend the rest of it on AI. How about that? Yeah. So now you got a lot more financially motivated criminals. At one point it was hacking is cool, right? And then it was hacking because you wanted to whatever in the old days take down an IRC channel just so you could be a super god on it or something. But now, of course, there's money involved in it. That's right. Well, you could become op if you split it, right? So hacktivists and terrorist groups, that's a big thing, so these things are all doing it. Curious hackers, those haven't gone away, they're not new, but they are doing more of it in industries. So kind of like I mentioned before, right? It used to be, especially in critical infrastructure, it was expensive. You didn't worry about it so much because to go play with some of this equipment, as a hacker, you'd have to come up with $250,000 just to get a piece of this equipment to play with. But now you find that stuff on eBay all the time. I mean, it's not that hard to come across it. Most of the prices of that stuff have come down. So a lot of curious hazards, insider threats, like you said earlier, right? So this is a big thing you're gonna hear me talk a lot about today, complacency. Now, for those of you that are in, especially critical infrastructure, especially the ones that are big industry, you'll hear complacency a lot because they know it's a killer. Whenever you get complacent about anything, it has a tendency to have a real world effect. If you're complacent about safety, someone gets hurt or killed. If you get complacent about security, what do you think happens? So a lot of that is complacency, and a lot of that is about what we're talking about here today. So here's some of the things that cause, as an effect of that. If you're complacent, people get overconfidence. How many people have heard their organization say, we think we're good to go, and you guys are just kind of like drumming up extra work for no reason? That's right. Well, we're getting to that one. That's even another one. We've been running this forever, and we've never been hacked, so we're good to go, right? So nothing has happened so far. Very next one, right? There you go, buddy. So, lack of management support, that's a biggie. So in a lot of them, more and more, you're seeing that pushed up where the management's getting recognized because they see it all over news, emphasis on the executive officers. But even so, there's a lot of organizations that have been around a lot of decades, and cyber is more about the regulatory part than the actual, do we need to protect something, which is a problem about that. So it's like, well, we passed the last inspection, or we passed the last audit, so we must be okay. So lack of resources, well, that's everywhere, right? And then of course burnout. If you're, been doing it for so long and you've become complacent, you're just like, I don't have the energy anymore just to kind of like worry about all these things that I'm not getting done or not doing correctly. Anything else anybody can think of or add? Yes, it does not make money. It's very true. What did you say? Right, yes, very. It won't happen to us because no one cares. I will say, if there's anybody for water, I apologize, but that's what they said forever. No one's going to attack water, no one cares. Some of us said, oh, they'll get to you. They certainly have recently, right? So, very good point. I'll give you, let me throw you one too. Yep. So, how do you spot complacency? Any thoughts? Well, let's start off with lack of vigilance. You know, telltale signs is you're not really going at it. You're going through the motions, right? That's a good sign that complacency is starting to set in. So you're not paying close attention to what you're doing. You know, that you're skimming over details. That can affect all kinds of things. You know, the devil's in the details with all these things, right? So overconfidence. We talked about that a little bit before. Must be good to go. Hasn't happened to us, right? So, you know, estimating that either your defenses are so good or underestimating your opponent, you know, the adversaries, both of which, you know, why would they bother with us? That type of thing. Resistance to change. We feel that in a lot of places, you know. If you've been, you know, some of these, especially industries, have been around a long time. Like I said, I do a lot in nuclear space. As they said, they were building stuff before you put rockets up there. So, you know, they feel very comfortable and they know what they're doing, how they're doing it, and they are not fast movers when it comes to change. Just making any change takes forever and costs a ton of money. So this is the adage almost everybody's probably heard of. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And that's nothing could be more true to me from my experience in industry, which is, hey, we don't want to touch that thing. It's been working fine for 35 years. I don't want to go and do anything to it now. Some of which is understandable, right? I mean, you know, it's pretty normal to say we spend a lot of money on something. Let's just run it till it's dead. Low effort and motivation. That affects a lot of people. So not just in your group, obviously cybersecurity and that kind of stuff, it's rough. But as you walk around other people in other areas, you're going to have a lot of similar issues, right? You're going to see in them, they're already overworked with what they're doing, and do they really need one more thing from cybersecurity? You know, it's kind of a demotivator right there. Failure to adapt. So, you know, as the stuff is changing, we all know that this stuff changes, but industries move slower, so they're not going to adapt as quickly, and they're often not motivated to adapt. Believe it or not, there's plenty more of these. Infrequent audits and reviews is a big thing. So a lot of times that's, you know, in some industries that's pushed down by regulators and that kind of stuff. And what you'll see is almost nothing happens. Then a few months before an inspection or before an independent audit, panic sets in. They're willing to spend and do anything in order to get it done. And then if they somehow make it through it, they go, whew, we made it. And then they forget all about for another 2 years or whatever it is they got to do. So common problem with that is the frequency. And sometimes thinking that you're A-okay, you know, until it actually occurs to you. Inconsistent performance, that's a red flag. Whenever you see that, you know, you've done things and it's like suddenly it's not really producing the same results as you expect, that's usually a sign of complacency setting in. People are going through the motions, but they're not really watching what they're doing. Failure to improve, it's kind of related. You know, it's just whatever it is, it's good enough, move on. We got other things to worry about or to focus on. Ignoring warning signs, you know, individuals and organizations may downplay or ignore early warning signs. That is a real problem in our industry because the best chance of stopping something or preventing something bad from happening is the earlier the better. Once they're all in there, it becomes very expensive, Very hard to undo, very hard to, you know, suddenly say, well, we sure we got it all, even though they broke in. That becomes very difficult questions for organizations to answer. So, you know, the keeping focus on the warning signs. And then worst case scenarios, another thing is, which we'll get into, things like incident response drills. People tend to come up with scenarios, and they'll pick a scenario, sometimes hopefully knowing that they kind of know what the scenario is and everybody's going to succeed okay on it. Or you got the other one where they're coming up with a totally far-fetched scenario. In both of those cases, the problem that you have is you lose everybody. Either they're just going through the motions in order to get through the incident response, you're not really learning anything. The point of doing the drill is to learn something. If you come out the other end and you don't have any lessons learned, you didn't do it right. I guarantee you didn't do it right. If you go through there and everybody's lost and confused, you also didn't do it right. So you got to find that balance in there. So the need for innovation, right? Talking about that. Well, as we said, we have lots of problems. If everyone's bored, no one's paying attention, they're becoming increasingly complacent on what they're doing, then what's the solution? You're going to have to do something different. If you continue doing the same thing, it's going to continue operating as we expect, right? So, you know, here we go, like, without, you know, any innovation, you know, you're going to have what you were calling a mature security process. How mature was it really, you know, but you called it mature, but there's a very fine line between it being mature and it being just daggone old and outdated. And that's a big risk, right? So, like I said earlier, training becomes a click test. The whole thing is, how fast can I fly through this computer-based training, get my thing, and move on into my next task, right? Well, what's the point? Like, why even give them training if they're not really going to learn anything from it? That's just a waste of everyone's time. So it's important to rather have better, easier, sometimes even shorter training that you actually take something away from instead of ending up having some kind of long 50-page slide deck that you end up clicking through just to hope that you get the questions at the right, you know, at the end right. And this is, of course, obvious thing. People become zombies in their routines. So as you keep doing the same routines over and over again, you don't spice it up, they're going to get that glazed over look even in a job, right? So this is a problem everywhere. Like, you know, if you're looking at events on a sim all daggone day, eventually you're going to miss stuff and not pay attention to it. Why? Because you looked at 5,000 of them already. So you need some way to mix it up so that, you know, you could be focused on what you're doing. So turning work into play, that's a big thing, right? So what we're trying to do is, you know, it is a balance, right? You got to make your job and your work serious, but at the same time, it doesn't mean it can't be enjoyable, and you can merge some of that stuff together to make it, add some challenge to it. So here it is, what's gamification? Again, everyone kind of knows, but, you know, here's the thing, but the big thing is keeping a couple things in mind. It doesn't really matter what it is, in this case, like chips or something, but having some manner of showing some success or some value into it, right? So providing points or giving levels or whatever kind of thing. Those are all different types of manners in order to gamify stuff that you're doing. So some of the key elements of that we'll go over, the benefits of it, and well, we got some, oops, did I hit back there? Sorry. So points was one of the things we talked about. That's a common method, racking up points in order to show progress. So if you're doing an in-person thing, you can do that just like I am now by throwing chips and saying you're getting something for answering correctly or being engaged. There's also a stick to that on some of them. When we do some training courses, we say there's a test at the end. If you get enough chips, you don't have to take the test. So you cash them in at the end. That has worked unbelievably well. So like when people go to cash that in, they pay amazing attention during the course because they're answering, they're engaged, and everything else, because who the heck wants to take a test, right? So that's one of the ways that we do that. There's others. Badges and honors, one of those things is just showing that they got a success or they did well something. Same thing you do outside or we do in other areas of cybersecurity, but you can do that within the organization as well. Levels and progressive to show as you have people, especially on a team, that they're making progress overall towards whatever goals that you set out. So it's not static. It's not just doing something and you're done, but that you're making progress. Challenges and quests, I'll go over a few of those things, which is just, having things that would otherwise be normal day-to-day operations, but turn some of those into more of a challenge or a way to improve your ability to engage people to do stuff. Leaderboards, I'll talk about that. There's also negative sides of some of these, and we'll get into that. So you got to be cognizant of that. Social engagement, that's a big one. What we've seen by doing these types of events and everything else is that you get everybody kind of involved, and that involved really makes a difference. And we've usually encouraged making sure to get people from different areas of the organization involved, because that crosstalk makes a huge difference. Instead of just saying you're going to have some discussions with just cyber people or a cyber team, and then have ones with just an engineering team, for instance, having them join the same thing and do different roles helps a lot, because they bring their own role to the table when they're discussing stuff. Time constraints. So adding some element of time, not enough to drive everybody crazy, but adding time to it helps simulate what happens under actual stress. So when an event is actually occurring, you're not just going to sit there and say, I'm going to get back in 3 weeks in order to do this, right? So if you're gamifying something, add an element often of time to show that, hey, you got to try and figure out what you're doing before that time frame runs out. Storytelling is an important part. Make it so it's interesting, so you've got something to talk about. With the personalization, this is something that's really good, which is if you know what the audience is and the different types of makeup of it, making sure that whether it's the training or the game that you're about ready to do is somewhat personalized for the audience that are participating in it. Don't just generically do the same thing for everyone, which is exactly what the CBTs do, right? Everybody, I think I have another slide in here. How many people you go to and you're talking about industrial stuff, whether that be like, I said pumps or, electrical switches and all that kind of stuff, and talking about cybersecurity, and you ask them about cybersecurity, and the only thing they can think of is, oh, I'm not supposed to click on a link. It's like, well, that is important, but that's not what we're talking about, right? So, making sure that they're engaged and actually know about it, and just didn't get the one thing of hyperlinks are bad for some reason. And also feedback, obviously, like I said before, lessons learned, but getting feedback as you're doing it. You can do it in the middle of it. Like right now, the eyes glazing over because I haven't thrown any of these chips out is starting to set in, right? So you got to double check your audience, what you're doing, and figure out where we're going with it. So rewards and prizes. So I told you the stick one. Hey, you're going to have to take a test unless you can buy your way out of it. There's kind of a reward versus a stick there, but also prizes, which I've got one here. So the person who gets the most chips by the end of this will in fact get a prize. So, and we do this even within the organization. Say, hey, there's certain ways we can reward that, and it kind of makes it a little more interesting. The prize really isn't so important. It's just you're getting something for the effort. Makes a difference. So, again, what's it going to do? Improve engagement, motivation. It's important. You got a lot better retention of information. When people are engaged and they're interested, they're going to remember more of it, and they're also going to think about how that might apply to them, right? So real-time feedback, like I said, if you're in the right environment, especially a smaller one, then you can kind of gauge and also request how things are going, or if you need to change something up a little bit. So security conscious workforce, right? We don't want to forget about the human factor in cybersecurity. Now, that's often overlooked a little bit because when we look at the human factor, we're usually looking at blame. And that's, I think, another talk hit that pretty well, which is saying, well, it's everybody's responsibility to do cybersecurity, and therefore when something goes wrong, it's because some human performance problem happened, and therefore we failed to do cybersecurity correctly, right? That's a little bit of a cop-out, right? What you want is engagement so everyone's thinking about, but everyone understands what their particular roles are and what they're doing in order to do it. So being aware is one thing, but being focused, like because you did one thing wrong that suddenly it's all that person's fault, is kind of discounting that you've obviously got other cybersecurity concerns besides the fact that one person clicked the link or the one person did something wrong. And if you think about that in some of the other industry stuff, you have a person who's working on something. Maybe they did make a mistake. They get injured. They don't just say, well, Bob screwed up. In fact, if it's bad enough, a lot of these industries will stop all work. They'll make everybody sit there ridiculously for an hour or two as you talk and contemplate about how you really got to get back and make sure that you know what you're doing so you don't get injured while you do your work. Well, that's, instead of beating up Bob, you got to think everywhere in every check that went in the company that failed to do his job to make sure that that was going to remain safe. Same thing we should do in security. Everywhere we had an opportunity to make sure that Bob didn't make a mistake or that we didn't give him something that would allow him to make a mistake and so forth. Oh, keep hitting the wrong button. So that's the stop blaming people. Doesn't get you very far. You want to empower the people. You want to say, hey, if you see something, bring it up. We're going to reward you for it if you do. Help us find the problems that need fixing, not the other way around. Traditional training methods. Can anybody think of any challenges with it? We mentioned a few already. Boring, yes, definitely boring. We can't say that enough times, right? It's repetitive, right? So a lot of them are, here's your annual CBT where you got to do the same thing that you did the last 12 years or whatever it is, and they didn't even update the slide, so it's the same daggone thing you've always done. Was that you? Who said it? There you go. That's another perfect one. There's not really any gray area or even feedback. I can tell you one's on there. I'm a cybersecurity guy. I go to so many different sites, and I have to take every one of their CBT, here's all the security crap you're not supposed to do thing, and I find perpetual mistakes in it. And I don't even mean little. Like, they'll click on things, say, go read this document. If you click the document, it's busted. It's not there. And so then you say, well, how many other people, how many people are really reading this document? Like, you just put it in there assuming everyone's going to read it, and then you say, yes, I read it. Well, obviously no one's read it for a year or 2 or 3 years because I come in and nobody can even remember when it worked, right? So that was one for you too, yeah. The repetition kills, so you got to keep it updated. Those are all good points. Boring, repetitive, see? Good thinking. Often full of mistakes. And, I already hit the next one. Effective training solutions. Awareness training is, I'm just going to say it, a bunch of garbage. We have everybody take awareness training all the time. Does anyone actually think that works? Because I'd like to have a debate with somebody who actually believes awareness training does something. Not a single person, no takers. So, but it's pumped everywhere. If you listen to them, it's all about, you got to do the awareness training, keep people doing awareness training. Well, it's just not effective because could it be effective? Probably, but you got to relate it to something that they're actually doing, not just saying, generally understand there's bad guys out in the universe. That's not, okay, there could be bad guys around the corner or something, but I don't know what to do about it. That's not going to help me. If it's more like, hey, you might not want to use an ATM at 2:30 in the morning. That might be a little more valuable, So it's like you need something that means something to somebody. Like I said, job related. And this is a big one. Conflate industrial security with email security. I can't tell you how many times I see that. I go around interviewing people. I used to be a former Nuclear Regulatory Commission inspector and doing cybersecurity. And we would just go question people. And over and over and over again, we'd ask them questions. We were only concerned about safety. We didn't care about anything else. Make sure that the public is safe. We go in there and they're like, yeah, I just did my security training. I'm like, okay, good. What did it tell you about, what to do about this type of digital equipment, blah, blah, blah. It says, well, I remember something about like, if we get an email and we're not sure if the link is good, then we should ask somebody. I'm like, okay, well, you should do that, but that's not what we're talking about. We have all these other things we got to worry about. So the industrial stuff is very different stuff than just security, just the typical IT security it goes through. And so they're being beaten to death with the IT side, but they don't know anything about the operational side. Let's see here. So incorporating game elements and thing, points, chips, like I said, countdown, timer, storytelling. We went over a lot of this, personalization. Types of gamified training activities. Incident response was one I did. It's a big one. We've had a lot of success with that. Spiding cyber events. Hey, let's make some stuff happen and make sure that you're going to actually see it rather than just talk about it or demonstrate it in some kind of slide deck thing. Known vulnerability hunts, and I'll talk a little bit about that in the future too. Can be kind of exciting to just say we know there's some problems out there, and we don't even have to get just cyber people to point it out. Like, if you know that some of the updates aren't working, for instance, then you have people that go out there and say, hey, I'm on here and I'm noticing that whatever is out of date. That feedback to you means that they're actually paying attention, right? So making sure that you align the game with learning objectives. So what you definitely don't want to do is just come up with an interesting game that has no relevancy to what you're trying to do, right? So definitely outlining the goals you're trying to achieve and trying to align the specific things that you're trying to do in order to keep people occupied with those. So very goal-oriented. Again, job functions are important when you do that, and make sure you have a very clear desired outcome. And this is a big one. You don't want everything to be too easy, because if it's too easy, then you're gonna kind of go through the motions. It's like everybody gets an award automatically kind of thing, right? Of course, you don't want it to be impossibly hard either. You don't want it it's very unachievable. So it's good to find the kind of middle road on that. Make some obstacles more difficult, just like some questions may be more difficult, and some may be a little bit easier, but that way everyone's kind of involved when you're going through the process. So let's talk about a couple success stories, at least that I personally kind of been involved with. We've done a cybersecurity escape room, and it's kind of silly, but it was effective. You got in there, we made certain different things that were relevant to the particular industry and had them kind of think about what they had to do in order to get the clues to get out of there, just like any other escape room. But it's a unique way of doing it rather than just, again, death by PowerPoint, which I know you're all suffering through, but this was not a great forum for us to do that in. Build your own training. This was a lot of fun. This worked way better than I thought when we went to implement it. I thought it was going to be a complete disaster. Turned out to be the opposite. What we actually did was we went in with what the end goals were, what everyone was supposed to learn, and then we got the participants to help design what the training should be. Now the learning was actually that. They actually learned the most because they were building the imagined course. We actually didn't use the course, but the fact that they went through the process of doing that and doing it. So that way, a lot of people, when they're having to think about what they've got to do in order to do it, that really sets in a lot better than if you just, show them the answers to what the problems are, right? So that ended up being a very neat exercise. I was surprised. It wasn't my idea. I can't take credit for it, but boy, did it take off after we did it. Find a rogue WAP. I can't believe how many places I've been at that, we kind of implemented those things just to make sure that, the stuff, everything we're doing is working. But a lot of places just took it for granted. In fact, I was on an inspection and I walked around what was the equivalent of a flipper right next to the person walking around with a fluke. And he came back saying, well, we didn't find anything, even though I followed him all around with it. And of course, he had the fluke misconfigured. So he never tested it, never anything. Whereas I said, like, look, if you gamified it, just went and hid one of those in the middle of a plant, you should find it. And that's kind of like, woohoo. So we took it up a notch. We put in a $100 Amazon card and attached it to the WAP we hid out in the plant. And boy, they weren't leaving until they found it. I guarantee that. Even just a $100 card made a big difference off. But it was the fun to go actually find out where it was, right? Protect your Raspberry. That's a big thing that we've done several times. The closest thing I'd say is it's kind of like the carrying the bag of sugar for those people who've done that in high school. You know, it's supposed to protect your kid kind of thing. We'd hand out everybody a Raspberry Pi. They've got to protect it in all kinds of means, and they have to control it for an entire week. And of course, they get points if they're successful, and they get negative points if they get destroyed, and we have to give them another one. And I will tell you, a negative part of that was it was so effective. There was a guy in the course, he came from physical security, nothing to do with cyber. He was in that same course with us. He honestly thought cyber was just a load of crap. Just didn't believe it at all. The third day, he actually said he didn't sleep all night because the stuff we showed him, he was sure someone was going to break in the hotel room while he was sleeping and steal his Raspberry Pi because, you know, those because people were playing dirty. You know, people go to the bathroom and they'd mess with their Pi or whatever kind of stuff. So we actually had to tone it back down a little bit. But that guy learned a lot. He said that was a game changer for him because he never really took that stuff seriously until he saw firsthand how easy it was to kind of do all those things. Cyber range, for those of you who haven't experienced that, those are always fun. You can make a virtualized environment to represent a lot of the things that you have and then actually come up with scenarios in order to attack them and give points depending on how well that they do. That ends up being a lot of fun for people. That's a little bit more for people who are in the cyber stuff than the rest of the plant people, but it's still effective for everybody to see it. That's not supposed to be hunger, it's supposed to be hunter. So no one's eating the USBs, I'm sorry. But the USB hunter, it's a similar thing to the other one, run around there trying to find the USB. We also did a couple where we were intentionally dropping USBs off and tracking them to see who was plugging them in. It's kind of like a pen testing, but it was more under a game scenario. Count the digital devices. That's a good one for ones in real industrial environments. That's a good one because you can go in a particular area of a plant and say, show me all the digital devices, and you will be surprised how many people will miss them because they just don't look like blinky lights with PCs and servers everywhere. Incident response drill, like I said before. Anybody have any other ideas for this so I can steal it? I'll give you credit. No? Yeah. Yeah, so lock it up, control, you know, custody and control of stuff. Yeah, all of that is a big problem. It's a big thing in all these things because I don't know if any of you have been to a nuclear power plant, but it's one of the most protected places on the planet. It makes military bases look kind of weak sometimes. Okay, I mean they're guys, they're armed all the time. So they have a lot of physical security. You basically go through TSA every single day in and out of that plant. And what I kind of had to talk to some of them about is, hey, you know, you stop all these things, make sure people aren't bringing bombs in here and people aren't bringing in guns in here and all this kind of stuff. But from my eyes, every time I see it, everybody's walking in there with a handful of USBs and laptops and everything else, and that's the digital equivalent to a pipe bomb. And they were like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. It's like, well, you have to understand, like, you know, you're going to get a big boom out of it, but you're just letting all that stuff straight on through. So that physical security doesn't mean all that jack to me because, you know, you're allowed to bring any of that stuff in there, and that's a big opportunity. And it's basically on my honor, I'm not plugging any of that stuff in the equipment I'm not supposed to. So it's a big, big deal. What do you say, QR code? That's a great one, actually. That's a good idea. Run around there, find someone to scan the QR code. It's really good. I might steal that. You gotta give me your name there, because it's simple, but it's good. Like it. Simple ones work the best a lot. Anything else? Yep. Don't raise your hand, just yell. That is very similar to something we have. I'm going to talk about, we've got a board game we're coming out with. I've seen a couple of different things like it. It's a little different than what we've done. But it's the same kind of thing. As we add a little element between cards and Dungeons and Dragon dice to randomize what's happening, so that you can, in the incident response, essentially you can be affected by things that you're not expecting. So there's no just coming up with a story that's a little more Dungeon and Dragon-y kind of thing, but you can roll and you can pick some cards and determine if you happen to have a environmental thing like a hurricane at the same time you have a cyber attack. Stuff that generally you don't want to believe will happen, or you'll discount, but this will kind of make you go through the scenarios. And really at the end of the day, you find out most of the scenarios are going to go through a lot of similar things, but it's important for you to kind of practice that and know what things are kind of stumbling blocks for you. But that's a great thing. If you know that, you can definitely share whatever it is, but thank you. Let me. Another one here. Sorry. Good thing I didn't go in baseball, huh? So best practices, said this kind of before, tailoring, right? It's just like personalization. Make it relevant to the audience that you're dealing with. Make sure you got the incentives and also the recognition. Sometimes, as you see just throwing around, it's recognizing that people are chiming in and have good things to add to the conversation or whatever the mode is. Measuring training outcomes. So I'm going to talk a little bit, depending on time here, where we are. It's an important thing is to make sure you know that you're being successful. Don't just guess at it. So, the incident response thing. So, need for preparedness. So the big thing is cyber attacks can be complicated. And a lot of times that's discounted. I've been in a lot of environments where they basically say, they pretty much try and limit it to say only one piece of equipment can be attacked at a time. And I'm like, that's maybe the most likely case, but that's certainly not even close to any like logical way of looking at it, because we've had plenty of circumstances where hackers will break into other assets just to get to the target that they're after. So, saying that they're only going to compromise one device is a little unrealistic. So understanding that they can be complex and that they don't have to play by your rules is a big thing. And an adversary is not locked down to what you want them to do. They can do anything they feel like. Multiple incidents, just talked before. You should generally be practicing the thinking that they're going to try and pick the worst time to do something for you, not the best time. They're going to, when you're all up and it's all nice and comfy and all electricity's on and you've got the AC going, that's when the attack's going to happen. When you've been knocked out by maybe one of the worst hurricanes ever, or earthquakes in another place, or mudslides, whatever the deal may be, somebody could be sitting there saying, hey, they're probably pretty occupied with whatever they got going on there. This is a good time to cause some go have some fun and mess with stuff. So external factors is another one. A lot of times you get caught up with only thinking that it's the adversary and your stuff, and that there's not any other external factors taking place. You can have all kinds of things. You can have vendors also being attacked. You can have things that take out multiple networks, all that kind of stuff. So Coordination, making sure that you're well coordinating amongst teams. In a second, you'll see what probably several of us will complain about. Getting people to participate is a real problem in a lot of organizations. You have all these things in your incident response plan about all these different types of people, and a lot of times it comes time to implement it, and you're going to test your plan, and you're going to get like 10% of the people to show up. And so one of the things is that's probably more realistic than you'd like to think it is, because that's probably how many people are going to actually be available when you actually implement your cybersecurity plan or your incident response plan. So keep that in mind. The high pressure decision making. I've sat through a bunch of those where it's so casual that I would say you've obviously never been through a real incident, because it's never that casual. Now, I'm not saying the worst thing is be running around with your head cut off and act like everything is terrible, but you need to have some kind of simulation, understand that you're not going to have all daggone day to make decisions for everything. And sometimes you're going to have to make a decision, and even if it's not the best decision, you're going to have to run with it. You do want to simulate that. So when you gamify it, make sure you've got something. That's why I say things like timers and that kind of stuff. Your problem's going to get worse. I didn't see. Oh, sorry. It's the lights are hitting me. Yeah. So high pressure decision making, right? I mean, that's an important thing to add that additional element to it that you don't normally get from just a regular tabletop. There we go. So, conducting cyber war games, that's kind of fun. Again, you could do that with a bunch of different things. Some of them are tabletop, some of them are actually doing cyber ranges, or just even emulating a particular area of your organization is a good thing in order to test that. Definitely role playing, make sure that you have different stuff, and even have people stepping in where they don't normally would take on a responsibility they wouldn't normally do, just so if something were to happen, because that does happen. People can get sick or get injured or whatever it is. So understand that you got to stand up and definitely learning from those outcomes. So another one we did had to do with hardening. Hardening is kind of a routine thing. Usually it's checklist based, but one of the things we kind of asked everybody is, well, hey, you got to kind of protect this stuff. Some of that was done in our Raspberry one as well. You got to protect your stuff, figure out how to do it. So you got to learn a lot about doing that. But also, how are you doing it? And this is a problem you see in a lot of industrial stuff, right? Is you got the candy thing. For those who haven't heard it, you got a nice hard outer shell, and it's nice and gooey in the center. And that's because it's very hard to protect a lot of things on the inside of some of these industries because they're just not made for that. So a lot of effort goes on protecting the outside, but not the inside. And so simulating that and talking about that is important, because assuming that hard outer shell is always going to protect you is wrong. So that's where you get the thing about perimeter defense versus defense in depth, right? Perimeter defense is what a lot of places focus on. Defense in depth is what you actually want to do. Protect your Raspberry, like I said, another one. Challenges in the industrial environment. Like I said, a lot of those things are there's just simply equipment that are going to be very hard to protect. They weren't built to have any cyber protections, and it's going to be pretty hard to do anything about it afterwards. Help me out. So, the gamified discovery. So this is more, just like we said about some of the other ones, about having things like, bug bounty things or finding vulnerabilities. Rewarding people for being able to find flaws is a good thing. You get kind of programmed to overlook them. But what you actually want to do is encourage them to find it. Collaborative discovery. We have played out scenarios where we took a group of people, like the system owner and some of the people that work with on a particular area or system of a plant, and had them think about, and just spend not very long, 15, 20 minutes to think about if there's any areas there that they could think of that would be an issue. And now they're participating. They're not an adversary to the cyber group. But that normally happens, you go in there and say, you need to protect all this stuff. And they're like, why? Right? Instead, they're helping you think of things that actually have to be improved, and that helps also with any battles on why you need to do the things that you're trying to do. The leaderboards and recognition, it always helps out to show off that. Like I said, there's a downside to that, which is there are some personalities that when you get into too much competition, they're going to bail. And so it's important to try and keep those people engaged as well. But there are some people who are highly motivated by getting the recognition and also doing that. So you got to kind of find that balance. Just be cognizant. If you just say everybody below this line sucks, it's not going to have the outcome that you want. All right, ensuring success. So we mentioned this one before, right? Got to align with your security policies. So don't just invent games. Make sure you got a goal in mind. You want to balance fun with seriousness. So the whole thing is it's got to be entertaining, it's got to be engaging, but you have to have the right amount of seriousness to understand that while you're applying those things, the topics you're talking about are not jokes. So you can apply it to most things. Let's say if it's safety that you're doing and not security. It's important to understand the safety is a serious thing, but that doesn't mean you can't add some gamification to the actual discussion in order to accomplish that. So just find a nice balance between that. You need to confirm in some way that you've transferred knowledge. So some of that can be just simple as participation, getting the feedback on it. Some of it can be by seeing what they do within obstacles that you place in a particular game setting. So if something's really complicated, maybe you do have to explain things first, and then you might be participating in the game, but that way the game becomes the check to make sure that you've actually transferred that knowledge. And that way you're not succeeding at your goal if everyone's looking at you like deer in the headlights, right? So concept execution, how do you actually do it? First thing is define your objects and the scope of what you're trying to do. Don't make it too broad. A lot of people do that. I get one shot at this, so I'm going to try and teach them everything in 2 days. And it's just not going to happen, right? So shrink it up, and they'll want more, because if it was a good time and it was enough knowledge transfer, they won't be too resistant to having another one later. Appropriate gamification elements. So out of that big laundry list, you don't have to do them all. Pick the ones that are most appropriate for the thing that you're trying to accomplish. Pick some combination and then incorporate them. And you can even mix it up. If you're doing the same training thing next year, don't make it exactly the same, gamification that you did the year before. The content may still be what you're after, but the way that you engage people can be very different. Engaging the stakeholders and participants. You want to do that early, so you go and say, hey, we're going to try something new, right? We're going to try adding an element of gamification to some of these things that's normally pretty hard for people to digest. And we want your buy-in, and we even want your input on that. Again, meeting the objectives, can't say that enough. And then perform a pilot if you can. If you got an opportunity before you just go for broke, take a smaller group or subsection, try it out. Sometimes you do that with even the managers or whatever of different groups, and run it through it so you see what it's like. Now they've got their buy-in too, right? If they've gone through that and given their feedback, it's going to be a success at that point. If you've done that homework, you'll definitely be good. Obviously, always solicit feedback. And if you do all those things, you'll probably be in a pretty good shape. I don't think it'll be too much there. Just a couple things. All of this helps the team building aspect. If you do this stuff, you'll get better teams. You're going to break down a lot of those silos if you're inclusive, and you're explaining to them why what they're doing, what you're doing is to support them, and not just you're dictating to them, which becomes too much of a problem why you get so much of that hostility between different groups and organizations. Continuing learning so that they take something when they leave. In other words, it's not just at the end of the course they're done and they forget all about it, but they've got something to think about on the way out. And so some of the challenges. Again, resistance to change. It happens a lot, right? We've always just clicked our way through it. Why do I have to sit through a course, or why do I have to watch this, or why do I have to do whatever? It's usually not so bad if it's structured and it's had buy-in by everybody. In fact, the feedback usually speaks for itself. If it's gone well, people don't mind going to it or participating in it. Resource constraints, that's a problem with everything. You can have that in this case too, which is, oh yeah, design this whole thing all by yourself while you're doing your other 5 jobs. But you know, my response to that is taking the time to do this will probably make a lot of your other jobs easier. I mean, we've seen that firsthand, which is if you convey these messages, and the next time, instead of spending 3 days arguing with whatever, an engineer about why he's got to implement something he doesn't think he needs to implement, it's a discussion that's going to go much smoother, and you'll cut that time down a lot. So I think it's probably worth the extra effort. As I said, some people get disheartened by the leaderboard, so be careful on how you use that and know your audience. You want to ensure that everything that it is in there is relevant to what you're talking about. Don't go outside the bounds of what we said at the first thing, which is determining your scope. And there we go. So how do you assess it, right? You need to make sure that at the same time you come up with the goals, you're going to figure out how you're going to measure them. It's not new, it's the same with just about everything else, but keep it in mind. So, okay, I'm going to gamify this thing. I'm going to think, well, what is the goal? I expect them to learn this. Well, how am I going to measure that goal as we go through it? Is it by the points, or how many people responded, or do I have a different metric in order to do that? So make sure you're doing that up front. You want to track the participation and ongoing performance. Am I on the wrong pink thing now? Okay. You want to analyze security improvements. So as a result of this, the whole point is to make your security program better. So you should be able to see the results of this. If you had this stuff and you didn't, then you should have a way to measure the improvement of that after, some period of time after doing these types of things, training and gamification, that kind of stuff. Some of it will be obvious. I guarantee you start doing the find the rogue thing and that kind of stuff, you'll have a pretty clear understanding on how well people are improving or not. So, future, I gotta go through this real quick. There's going to be an increasingly emerging technology. There's the AI thing. We had to talk about that. You saw I waited to the end so we wouldn't spend 3 hours talking about it. But that will obviously be a big thing, and you can integrate some of that fun into your gamification. A lot of this has been talking kind of like about training, but I don't want you to think that's the only thing you can gamify. Just like I said, even the day-to-day things about wireless scans or looking for rogue devices, or even looking at event logs, those things have place for gamifying too, and to measure the success of that. It's not just training. So there's a lot more coming with that stuff. Whoop. And I think that's all I got. So if you guys got any questions, or I answered all your questions, huh? Must have done pretty good. Is that right? Really? No questions, huh?
You throw enough pictures?
I didn't throw enough of them. I got distracted myself on time. All right, no other questions? Just say get the hell off the stage and find somebody else. All right.
Round of applause and mark, everybody.